All right. Jæja, góðan daginn allir, velkomin á þennan síðasta föstudagsfund. Allavega þetta vorið, eða þennan vetur. Við erum með hérna Ynte sem að mun fara yfir PowerBI með yfir Power Automate og hann mun sem sagt segja okkur aðeins það og ég ætla að biðja bara þakka ykkur fyrir samveruna yfir veturinn og við munum byrja aftur í haust og það sem sagt valkerfi núna inn á Facebook þar sem þið getið valið hvaða fyrirlestra þið viljið fá að sjá næsta haust. Þannig að endilega þrumið inn poll, þannig að þið getið haft áhrif á hvaða næstu fyrirlestrar eru. Þannig að, so Ynte, welcome. Thank you for giving us your time and showing us PowerBI via Power Automate and sharing your knowledge. This is not something that everyone do, so we are in the community appreciate this very much. So I'll just give you the torch and you can just start the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much then. Greetings to Iceland from the Netherlands, in the north of the Netherlands actually. My name is Ynte Jan. Probably also, I mean, a lot of people think my name is extremely difficult to pronounce, but if I look at your names, well, I could say the same for you. But it's just, I mean it positively, of course. I'm very glad to be here, to be with you and to share my knowledge with you. And as Gisli also already said, this community is very interesting to be a part of. And just because I learned so much from the community myself, I also want to give back some things that I have learned. And today, actually, I'm going to tell you about a project I did for a customer in which they had their data in PowerBI. They had a lot of interesting intelligence built into PowerBI. And then they said, all right, those data that are in this PowerBI report, well, this we would want to have it in a Power App, because we want to edit those data. And then we will then at the end do something with those data. So they said, okay, can you make this happen for us? So I try to find out how to do this. And I will tell you about this journey that I made, getting those data out. I mean, there's various ways of doing this, and I will show you the way in which we use Power Automate. Yeah, so, but before we start, just a small introduction on myself. Well, you see my sheet. I'm a freelance software developer, so I'm a one-man band, so to speak. I don't work at a big company or whatever, but I'm a freelance developer of software in Visual Basic or in VB.NET. And in 2015, I started with PowerBI because I immediately recognized this as being an enormously interesting tool. Because I'm interested in everything that has to do with data, actually. So I have always been working with SQL Server and all the other database things that Microsoft has in stock. My most recent project was about Dataverse connection. Yeah, so I'm a Microsoft geek, so to speak, and during Corona I thought, well, it will be time for a certification. So I got myself certified as being a Microsoft Certified Data Analyst, which just means that I have an exam which is almost finished as well, because after 2 years they say, okay, it's over and done with, you need to do another exam. So, well, it's up to me to do this, of course. And I'm also a speaker. I'm a part of the community. I very much like to be a community member. So I was a speaker and a volunteer at the Power BI User Group Day in Utrecht, in the Netherlands. This was a Saturday in the beginning of April, and you don't know how many people you could expect, but there were 900 people coming on a free Saturday to Utrecht to enjoy a whole day of Power BI. Yeah. So the session I'm giving you now is the same session that I was giving you there. That's why you see Power BI Gebruikersdag at the bottom of my sheets. Yeah, but this is the most recent and up-to-date deck that I have. So I'm using this deck, and I will share it with you afterwards. But first of all, of course, I'd like to show you what I've learned. So let's just start with my first sheet. One moment. Yes. Oh yeah, before we start, here's where I live, in Groningen, in the north of the Netherlands. If you might just want to look it up afterwards, it's in the top of the Netherlands. And it looks it's a very nice place because it's a medieval center, and I really enjoy living there. It's a city of 200,000 people, and we have a lot of international students here, even from Iceland to Denmark, Sweden, wherever they come from. And so this is a nice place to live in. Well, this is the question where it all started with. You'll see, I mean, people, they like Power BI reports. And if they look at Power BI reports, very often the first question they are asking you is, okay, this is a perfect dashboard. This is a perfect report. But how can you give me the data in Excel? So this question comes along very often. And I'd like to explore with you a lot of ways about how to do this. Yeah. So let's start. Well, first of all, I have to, of course, have to comment on this before I go on. I mean, it sounds a bit weird. I mean, to do data modeling, etc., visualizing data in a tool like Power BI, and then in the end, people just want the data out of it. Just so they actually say to you, skip about your thinking, skip your data modeling efforts. We want those data in Excel, please. Yeah. So, okay. But okay, there will be enough people that will ask you this if you are in the Power BI world. Well, how can you do this? Well, first of all, you can do this manually. You can export data from Power BI manually. You could export your data from any visual which is in a Power BI report. Yes, so in Power BI Desktop on your laptop, this option is there. I will show you where this option is. And there's a limitation because you have a limitation of 30,000 rows, and it will always be a comma-separated file that you export. If you publish your report online to do Power BI web service, you also can export data from any visual that's on the report. And you have a 30,000 max of rows in comma-separated format as well. But if you would want to export it as Excel, which is one extra option you have online, then the maximum is 150 rows. Yeah, so that would be something that might be enough for some people. Then some other person told me, yeah, but you can also integrate Power Apps and Power Automate. So if you have your common backend, say a SharePoint list or whatever, you could enter your data through Power Apps and then display the data as well in the Power BI. You could even combine them together, yeah. But that was no solution for me. But I was just telling you this option that would be a way of integrating your data between Power BI and Power Automate, or between Power App and Power Automate and Power BI, etc. If you want to export your data, just export your data, you could also have used DAX Studio. I don't know if you know this tool, but that's an extra add-in in Power BI called DAX Studio. And this also has an option to export your data. It can export things to comma-separated files. It can also export your data to a SQL server right away from DAX Studio. Yeah, so that would be another option. I have seen people export data from Power BI using R. So within Power Query in Power BI, you can call a R script, which can just say, okay, take the data from the previous Power Query steps and generate a CSV file using an R library that can just do this. Yeah. Then there is a new options. Quite some time ago, there was a new option introduced by Microsoft. You can enable a Power Automate button within a Power BI report. And as this question of this customer came to me about exporting your data, I said, okay, I can do it because this option was new then at that moment. And I said, okay, it's perfectly easy. I just use this option and then it will be perfectly all right. And as I first tried this option, I mean, I already told the customer that I would help them with this. And then I tried this button. And then I learned that there was a maximum of 1,000 rows in here. Yeah, so it's a nice option, this button. But yeah, the 1,000 rows is quite limited actually. So you wouldn't want to use this as well. And then there's a new tool from Marco Rosso. This is one of those two Italian Power BI gurus that is very well known. And he also made an extra tool called Bravo. It's an extra tool that came out some 2 weeks ago. You can add it in Power BI, and then from there you can also export your data without the limitations that are at the top. Yeah. So this is quite new, actually, this option. So, but this is all manual. You have to do something yourself to make it work. Yeah. Well, then yeah, let's have a look at this option. I mean, this is this Bravo program I was telling you about. So if you install this add-in program, you can have this extra option in Power BI, and within this extra option, you have the option to export data, as you see at the bottom. Yeah. Well, there should be also automated ways, because my customer said we want those exports to be done overnight, because if we arrive at our work, we would want to start working with the results of your export right away. So we don't want to push a button or whatever. We just want it to be ready when we arrive at work. So then I had to find out how to automate this eventually. Well, that could have been done by Power Query as well, because in Power Query, even online, there is an option to call a native query, which means you have the option to execute a SQL command directly from Power Query, which means that you could have said, okay, I want to insert data into a SQL server, say on Azure. Yeah. So if I had this in a report, I could have uploaded the report, and at refresh time, say 8 times a day, or I could have refreshed this, and then I could have written the data to a SQL server online through native query. That was another option that could be automated. Then if you would have built a paginated report in Power BI, I mean, if you have premium capacity in Power BI, you have the possibility to create paginated reports, to create long lists of data. And those long lists of data can be in a paginated report. You can upload those paginated reports to the web service. And then you can then export those reports from the service. Yeah. And then there's no max to the number of records or columns or whatever you are exporting. It's just that you have memory that you have to use for this. So that's the only limit you have. I'm just calling some options now. Yes, I will show you a few of them afterwards. Another option might have been PowerShell, because actually Power BI is, of course, a API-based system. Yeah, so there is actually a possibility to connect PowerShell, for instance, with web APIs of Power Automate or data flows or whatever, and then use this combination. And I have seen people do this either through the desktop version of Power BI on a laptop. So use PowerShell to start a Power BI desktop on a laptop and get some data out of there. And I also have seen people working with the Power BI web APIs as they are in the cloud. And if I say PowerShell, you can also say Power Automate, of course. Or if you're more in the Azure world, like you are, perhaps you would call it Logic Apps. Yeah. Okay. And then there's one more option, the Power Automate to DAX web API. This is a relatively new option, and I will focus on this one. Yes, this one has also a maximum of 100,000 rows or 1 million values, and it's depending on which one comes first. But there's always a limit, of course. I mean, we are using Microsoft capacities, and of course they limit things. They won't give you unlimited supplies, or you have to pay extra, of course. But in my case, they really wanted the normal tools of Power Automate to function on this, and so we could use this one. So that's the one I will be focusing on afterwards. First of all, I'd like to show you a few more practical things before I go into Power Automate. So the one thing you could do if you want to export this is to export Power, to use Power Automate to export paginated reports. So if you have a paginated report in your web service, you could use a Power Automate flow, and one of the actions in Power Automate is, you see the yellow dot, export to file. And at the right hand side of the screen you see, okay, those are the options. You can export it as a PDF, you can export it as a comma separated file, and at the end there's something else, well, as Excel. But comma separated file would probably be enough for everybody. So you could make a report without any fancy layouting. You could just throw the columns at it and then say export this to comma separated files. So that would be one option you could also use. Then there is this button in Power Automate, as I said before. You can add a Power Automate button to a Power BI report. And as soon as you do this, then there will be the Power Automate instance within your Power BI report. So the action might be Power BI button clicked. And behind that, you could say, put an extra step in there. Okay, take those data from this visual and export your data to, say, a SharePoint list or to a SQL Server on Azure or whatever. Yeah. So let's have a go at this. Just a small demo on this particular part. I have my Power BI. I will open the file. I thought I had opened everything already, but that's not true. So I will open a particular file. Well, I could also show you here, actually. This is the web service, you see? This is the web service. I have a beautiful report, and there's a button here, and it's called Run Flow. And I also have a SharePoint list. And as you see, there's nothing in the SharePoint list. The SharePoint list is absolutely empty, and I refresh it again. So I will first of all show you on the Power BI service how to do this. I will go to this, and I just click this button. I just click the button. It will, well, did I click it? Yes, I clicked it, I hope. I don't get any feedback on the button, if it's clicked or not, but I could check if this is running. I don't get any feedback from the button that it's running. Okay. Now I pressed it. Okay. So it has been triggered. So within the Power BI service, there is the option clicking this button, and then there's a Power Automate flow that will just get the data from this visual and insert it into a SharePoint list. So if I now look at the SharePoint list and I just say refresh, then those data will be there, I guess. Not yet. Sometimes yeah, there they are. So it actually worked. Yeah. So this is one of the ways that might be very interesting to you as well. So I will open the Power BI file and I will show you how this worked in Power BI. So you saw the end effect, and I'm now opening my Power BI file in my Power BI desktop, and I will drag it from my right screen to my left screen, where it is. One moment. Oops. Some strange things happen here over here. It went somewhere off the screen. One moment. I have to. Sorry. It's somewhere. It went from my screen to the right. I don't know how to get it back now. There it is. Sorry for this disturbance, but I somehow can't get it back. Yeah, there it is. So now I hopefully can drag it to the, yes, there we go. So here you have Power BI desktop. There is this button. I just got it in Power BI because on the visual pane of Microsoft Power BI, there is this extra button over there, Power Automate for Power BI. And how does this work? You just click this button. There will be a button on your page, as you see. You can then just drag some fields on this automation, on this visual. So just the payment date and the ship city. Just drag some fields on there. So, and then those columns will be taken up by this flow. Yeah. So the principle is you have a visual, you drag some fields on this particular visual. And then, of course, I did step one. You see, the first step is adding data. Then you say, I need to set up your flow. And then you're ready. So how to set up a flow? Well, they just kind of have hidden this option. It's about this more options. So at the top of this automate flow, you have the dots. And over there, you see, I want to edit it. And now I am in Power BI desktop on my laptop. But you will see that I'm connected to the Power BI service and actually to the Power Automate service in the cloud. And I can just pick a flow to run as soon as I edit the button. And if I'm editing this flow, just have a look at it, few seconds. This is a very simple flow in itself. It's a flow which is triggered by clicking a button. And the data that I dragged on the visual, they are in here. So I can add and apply it to each because I can then iterate over all the records through this Power BI data thing. And then I can say, create data, please. And if, as you see at the bottom, those Power BI data, I mean, I dragged 4 or 5 fields on the slice, on the visual. You see, those 4 or 5 columns are here as well. So I can just pick them by their name inside of Power Automate. And then that way I can then say insert them into, say, a SharePoint list or insert them into a SQL server. I mean, that's nothing new to you, I guess. I mean, you know about databases, I guess. but this is probably new to you. So a button in Power BI can actually get your data and insert them wherever you like to. Yeah, so within the Power BI desktop file. So I showed you this part. Right. So let's have a look at the other things that I was wanting to see you. The problem of the thing that I showed you just is that you have to do it manually. Yeah, and this customer of mine said, no, we want this to happen at night. So in the morning, we want to be able to start a Power App. We want those data to be ready for us to work on, because this was a company and they were selling and buying a lot of stuff, and so they had to make purchasing orders. They had to buy new stuff. Yeah, but so the Power BI report was actually built to generate orders. So they said, okay, we need 20 boxes of pens and we need 100 boxes of well, whatever. But of course, a lot of suppliers, they have minimum order amounts. So if this automated proposal of how many they should order did not reach a minimum order amount, they then would want to be able to edit this. They would say, just order a few more so that we get over this minimum order amount. So that was the setup of the complete application. So they had 18,000 products. This Power BI file generated a proposal for ordering numbers of those 18,000 products overnight. And then the next morning, they would want to have a look at suppliers. And per supplier, they would want to know, are we over or under the minimum order amount? And those under the minimum order amount, please show them in the Power App so that we can update certain numbers, and in the end, then we can order the amount that we have entered. Yeah, so that was the demand. So, and right at this moment, this post came out from the Microsoft Power BI team in August 2021. And they said, we have something new for you. We have the public preview of Power BI REST API support for DAX queries. And if you know Power BI, you know that you will be always using DAX. I mean, this data analysis expression language from Power BI. Yeah, this language is now usable in Power Automate. You can use Power Automate to write DAX queries that are fired against the Power BI REST APIs. And the result comes back in the form of a JSON file. And this JSON, of course, can then be used to be inserted into a Power Automate, into a SQL Server or a MySQL or Oracle or whatever. Yeah, so right in this moment, last year, August, this option was new. And then I said, okay, we're going to try this one. So that's what I did. Of course, there's some limitations, as I said. There's 100,000 rows, or there will be 1 million values per query at the maximum. Yeah, but that's and you can have one query per API call. So if you want to load more than one table at once, you need to make more calls. Yeah, but in one call, you can have 100,000 rows or 1 million values. Yeah, so that's the only limit, actually, so to speak. Yeah. So having said this, how do you make this work? Well, I wanted to do it right. I said, okay, I don't want this Power Automate flow to run under some kind of a particular user. I mean, this user can leave the company or whatever. So I said, just let's do it the right way, right from the start. Which means, sorry, which means that I suggested to them that we are going to use a service principal as a user. Yeah. So this meant that we had to add a user to the Azure portal. We had to use to register an application, so to speak, and I will show you how to do this. But I will register an application in Azure, and this user we then use to execute this flow and to get to this data sources. Yeah. So this user, we are going to make that one. We're going to give it a rights to read from Power BI. We are going to add it to an admin group within your Azure portal. And then in Power BI Web Service, we are going to say, okay, this particular user or this particular service principal has the right to read data from this. So you have to be active in the portal of Azure to create a user. Within the Power BI service, we have to give rights to this user to read this data set. And if we have done this, then we are going to make a Power Automate flow. But because this was a service principal, And because Microsoft normally actually always wants you to use O authentication, I said, okay, then let's go all the way. We will try to get O authentication working with Power Automate. And just in case you don't know what O authentication is, it's a two-step process. You first of all have to get a key from the service, and with this key, you're actually then logging into the service. I mean, it's always something like this. You're not logging into the Power BI service with a normal credential and a password, because you wouldn't want a credential or a password to be in a Power Automate flow. Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll go to a OAuth server of Microsoft. We get a key to be able to log into Power BI Automate. So we'll get a key first. Having a key, we are going to log into the Power BI service. Then we're going to fire DAX to this Power BI service, and then the resulting JSON, we are going to do something interesting with this. So that will be the setup of what I'm about to show you. So let's go. I could have registered an application in Power BI through this website. There is a special website called dev.powerbi.com. I didn't use this one, but I'm just showing you this. There is this option. If you really want to program or develop around Power BI, this might be a tool to use to register an application to enable this application to get to your Power BI data. Yeah, so that's one thing. I didn't do it this way. I didn't do it this way. I went to the portal. I have some slides just to document what I did, but I will do it as well afterwards as a demo. Yeah, but I will go to the portal of Azure. I will register an extra application. This application will of course need a name, which is of course very clear. This application will get two things. It will get an application client ID, and it will get a tenant ID. And a tenant ID is actually just the ID of the Azure directory that I'm using. So that's actually the point to validate your users. And the client ID is nothing more but a username. So those two things, where should we ask for which client is valid, yes or no? Then of course a client also needs a password. Yeah, and in Azure, it's called not a password, it's called a secret. So this particular service principal needs to get a secret as well. So I have to add a secret to the service. This has a certain expiration time and date. So in this case, 6 months, but you can also make it 2 years or whatever. But this is just the password of the user. Yeah. Okay, if you have the secrets, then this service principal needs to get rights to be able to connect to this web API. So I had to set this as one of the things that this service principal is allowed to do. Dataset.read.all. Yeah. Okay. Having done this, I'm ready. So the service principal is then in place, and I have one more thing to do. This service principal also has to be a member of a certain security group. I mean, I thought it would be enough, this service principal, but then I went to the Power BI service, and in the Power BI service they said, well, we recommend you that you do not use individual accounts in here. We recommend you that you are using security groups. So then I said, okay, I will add the service principal to a security group. Yeah, so it may seem superfluous, but it's the way Microsoft likes it to be. So this member, the service principal has to be a member of a group. Yeah. So I made it a member of the admins groups. But of course, in my one-man band company, this is not a problem. I think in a normal company, you would probably say, okay, I will create an extra group in which we put all those members of this particular department, and we'll put the service principal also within this particular group. And then this group is being used in Power BI to set rights. Yeah. So, but I did it in the admin group. Yeah. Right. Well, let's have a look at this. Let's have a look. I mean, I showed you the general principle. Just let's make it work. So I will go to my Azure development environment, and there you have the option of app registrations. And an app registration sounds like a user, but it's actually any application that wants to connect to some kind of Microsoft graph or whatever database. Yeah, so this is not a person. this is an account for a service principal, so to speak. So, and they call it registration. So I'm saying I want a new registration. And I say this is the Azure user group, Iceland's, well, whatever. It's Azure Iceland's. That's what I call it. So the service principal is called Azure Iceland. And I just say register. It has now been it is being created. So I now have an application client ID over here, and I have a tenant ID, which is perfect. Now I need a secret. So this user needs a secret. So there we go. At the left side of the screen, insert certificates and secrets, and I need to add a secret for this user. I need to give the secret a name as well. So I just say Azure as well. And well, let's make it valid for 6 months, and I just say add. Well, one thing I learned the wrong way is this. What I now need is not the secret ID, but I need the value. I mean, I need this particular value over here. And the strange thing, or perhaps the good thing, is that if you create a secret, this value will be on display only now. I can never see it again afterwards. Yeah, I can create new value, of course. I can create a new secret, but if you don't recognize, if you don't remember this number, you will never get it back again. Yeah, but it's just that you know. So I have given this user a secret now. So that's this one. And then there's one more thing that I need to do. I need to enable this service principal for certain web APIs. So I need to go to the API permissions part of this registration as well, because it will need some rights. So I will need to give it permissions. And there's quite some permissions I can give this service principal, yeah. But in my case, I am only interested in my case now in Power BI. So I'm looking for the Power BI service. There it is. And I want this option. And look at this. There are so many things that you can do with Power BI alone. Look at this. You can do all kinds of apps things and capacity settings and content settings and dashboard settings and data flow settings. So in my case, I only want something with data sets. Yeah, actually, I won't read a report. I will just connect to a data set. Yeah, if you build a Power BI report and you upload it to the service, you will upload the report, and there will also be a second thing uploaded at the same time that will be the data set. And actually, this data set is the only interesting thing for us because we're going to fire DAX to this data set. So I will just need to check this. I will have to set data set read all. That's the permission I have to set for this service principal. Yeah. So I just say add. Right. So I think we are ready now according to the Azure Iceland API. So the service principal is there. The next thing is to make this service principal member of a security group, because the Power BI service only wants to deal with security groups and not with individual service principals. Yeah, so that's why I need to do one more thing. I will go to my Azure directory, Active Directory. And as I said, I will go to my group of the admins, but well, probably I should say don't do this at home. In a normal company, you would not do it over the admins, but I will do it over the admins. I will just say I want to add a member to the admin group. I want to add it. And so what are we going to add? We are going to add Azure. And is there a Azure Iceland? There it is. You see, the service principal is there. So I'm in the admins member group, and I'm adding the Azure Iceland service principal to this particular security group. So that's okay. So in Active Directory, we're now ready. We have a user, it's a member of the proper group, and within Power BI, I will show you what you need to set up in Power BI to make this work, because we have finished the Azure part now. But within Power BI, you have workspaces, and within those workspaces, you can upload reports, of course. But a workspace is also meant for yes or no, enabling people to be there. So who is enabled to see a particular workspace? That's all controlled by Azure Directory. So if I go to this Power BI user group over here, then I could just say I want to control who is really able to access this particular Power BI workspace. Well, I could have said admin, of course, admins, that's one thing, but I will show you one more thing. I can also add Azure Iceland here. You see, the service principal also is here as well, because you have all the groups and all the individual users and all the service principals from your Active Directory. Yeah, so I could now just click Azure Iceland and just say make it a member, or just make it a viewer or a contributor or a reader. So a viewer would be enough. Add. So there it is at the bottom. I have a Azure Iceland service principal being enabled to get data from this particular workspace in Power BI. Right. So now the technical stuff has been set up. Let's move to my sheets again. Oh yeah, I will not do it, but I will show you on the sheet. I have one general tenant setting that I already set up before, and that's this particular one. So in the tenant settings of Power BI, you have to enable service principals to connect to Power BI web APIs. So that's the option that I'm showing you here. And at the bottom, you see it's recommended to use groups here. So I added the group admins here. Yeah, I could have also used the Azure Iceland group or whatever, but I just used admins now. Yeah, so that's there. Okay. Well, forget about this. Yes, I already did it as well. I will now show you how to use Power Automate to get those data working. I mean, this is the interesting part, the most interesting part I get. For this company, I had built a Power Automate flow that starts in the morning at, say, some 8 o'clock. And then it will take some time to get things working, but there will be a comma-separated files somewhere. I use Power Automate to refresh the Power BI dataset. And then in the next step, I will use Power Automate to get the data from this particular Power Automate dataset. And I will show you just how this works. So I will show you some sheets on how this Power Automate flow is working. First of all, I initialize a few variables: client ID, client secret, tenant ID, because as I told you before, we need to get the key first. So those three things, I need them to get a key from the OAuth server from Microsoft. Yeah, so those three things, I put them in a variable in Power Automate. Then, if you have those three variables, you will need to post a HTTP request to a OAuth server from Microsoft. So this is the way it looks like. There is a login service from Microsoft in which you have to supply the tenant ID, and you have to supply also the client ID and the client secret. And you have to tell the system that you are using client credentials, and you also will have to tell the system that you will have a particular scope, that you would want to use this key for Power BI things. I mean, you can find complete websites on all the details of what you'll see on my screen at this moment, but this is just the HTTP request you are firing to Microsoft. You are using those three variables there, and if you fire this, there will be something back. What will come back is a JSON file, a JSON response. And this JSON response will look like the JSON script at the right center of the screen. It will tell you when this key will expire. It will give you the key itself, and it will give you the type of the key. Yeah, so actually there are 4 things in this JSON response. And this JSON response looks like this. You see at the right side of the screen, you see what is this token from Microsoft looks like. Yeah, so you are actually creating a new step in Power Automate, combining the token type and the access token, which then means that you will have the text like bearer and then an enormously long number. And this is a key to identify yourself at the Power BI service. Yeah, so this is the step within Power Automate to make this work. Then, having done that, you will need the DAX query, the DAX that you would want to fire to the service. And how do you get a DAX query that you would want to use? Well, it's very simple in itself. Within Power BI, you can start up the performance analyzer. There is the performance analyzer within Power BI. This power analyzer is able to to monitor what Power BI does. So you can just say start recording my performance, and then you say refresh visual. I mean, it's at the right corner of the screen. You see, you can say start recording, and then you say refresh visuals, and then the Power BI performance analyzer will just refresh all the visuals, and then you can click on this particular option at the right of the screen, and you see this option over there, copy query. And this copy query just means get me the DAX that's behind this table or that's behind this visual. So on your screen, normally you would have a visual in which all the columns that you would want to export are there. Yeah, in my case, I have a table. I think there's 45 columns of data in there, and there's 18,000 rows of records in there. And I just got the DAX query from there to get those 18,000 records and to get those 45 columns over there. Yeah, so this DAX query, you can get it by just clicking copy query, and then you'll get something that looks like this. This is a DAX query. I didn't type this myself. I just copied it from Power BI. I thought there was one interesting thing in there because I saw the number 501 in there. Somehow Power BI is limited to just displaying a maximum of 501 rows in a visual, apparently. Yeah, but okay, you can change it. I mean, it's just text. This DAX is just text. Yeah, and you can just change this into, say, 100,000 or 30 million or whatever. But you really need to update this particular value. Otherwise, you only get 501 rows back from the service. Yeah. So, but this DAX query, if you have it, you can then use this DAX query within Power Automate. And that's done this way. So there will be one extra step in Power Automate in which you just save this DAX query in a separate variable. And this variable is called, in my case, DAX query. Yeah, so there's this DAX within the DAX query. Okay. Having done that, you will need to fire this query to the Power BI service. Yeah, how do you do this? Well, this is the way to do it. You will post a second HTTP request. One moment, a second HTTP request to the service. So in this case, you see at the top of the screen, you see a certain web address, which is api.microsoft.com. And I'm just executing a query against a particular data set. So you will need the ID of the data set. Yeah. The ID of the dataset can be very easily found if you move to the Power BI service and you move to this dataset. Then in the address ribbon of Power Automate, there will be, or of your browser, there will be this ID. So you will need the dataset ID. Then you will have to add a header with your token that you got before to identify yourself as a legitimate user of this service. And then you are firing the query to the service. Yeah. So at this moment, you can only fire one DAX query at a time. But as you see in the body, it says queries. So apparently Microsoft is planning to be able to fire more queries in future. But at this moment, you can only get one query at a time. So this way you are posting DAX to a web API endpoint. Yeah. And then what gets back is JSON. And you can find out, if you know Power BI, you can find the structure of this, but the structure just looks a bit like this. You get something back in which you have results, and within these results you have tables, and within these results you have rows. And as I said before, they probably are planning to be able to add more queries and apparently then also more results in one go. But at this moment, there's only one query able. So I had to do some tricks. With first, as you see, I mean the response from the web service that contains a group that's called results. And from those results, I need to get the first table. And from this table, I need the first rows. Well, the first row. And in this first row, there were my 18,000 records that I wanted to download. Yes, they were really there. Yeah. Yeah. So. And then the end effect will be that you have something like this. You will just get your column names from the Power BI service just like this. And you will have the table name and the customer name, the column name, and then the value behind it. So this is just one record that you're seeing at this moment. Yeah. So this is in the end something that you would want to have. And if you have this, well, the rest is history, of course. You can make this right back to SharePoint. You can write it back to SQL Server. Yeah, that's yeah. Let's just show this one. I mean, this is the final step in my Power Automate flow. I had a record set of 18,000 records. Yes, that's what was in the variable. And then I applied a apply to each, because you don't have a way in Power Automate to insert those 18,000 records in one go. I really had to go into a apply to each. And in the end effect, actually 18,000 was a bit too much for Power Automate, because Power Automate said, I will stop after 5,000 rows. So I had to put it into 4 separate parts, so to speak. Yeah, but so I have the flow 4 times actually to get the 1 to 5,000, 5,000 to 10,000, etc., etc. So I really added a extra index column to my Power BI report, ranging from 1 to 80,000. And so I would be able to get them in parts. Yeah, but okay, having said that, this is the way Power Automate then looks. You have to insert, well, I'm showing you how to insert an item in a SharePoint list. And at the left, you see the field names of the SharePoint lists. And at the right of the screen, you will, right of this box, you will see how this JSON looks like. I mean, at the top, you see what I had to type there. You have to get the order date separately. You have to get the order ID, the customer ID, etc. You have to all get it separately from this JSON. Yeah? If you type it, it may be a bit of a pain of the ass to do it, but if you save it and you return to it, it will look like the right version of the screen. You will just very neatly see orders, order detail, orders, customer ID, etc. So that you can survive that, I guess. Yeah. So this is the last step that my flow is about to do, and the end effect is really that they are inserted into SQL Server. In SharePoint. Yeah, and I said SQL Server now because after all, I should have done this in SQL Server actually, because I found out that a SQL Server has the possibility to work with JSON. I could have inserted the 18,000 records JSON into a stored procedure in SQL Server on Azure, and it would have been there instantly. Yeah. I didn't know this trick at this moment, and at that moment that I was programming this, they said, well, try to get it working without a premium license. So we did it with the SharePoint list. But, well, in the end, it's not too quick that way. I mean, this flow is running for quite some time before they actually can start working. Yeah, but let me show the flow as a complete flow. Yeah, but otherwise I'll just throw in sheets at you. I have this flow for you right at this moment. Let me have a look. Yeah, there it is. So this is the final flow that does the magic. Yeah. So in this case, I just have an example here, and I will start it manually. But as I said, at my customer, this thing starts automatically in the morning. Yeah. It will fill a variable with a client ID. I also need the secret of the client. I will need the tenant ID of so those 3 things I need to identify myself with the Azure Active Directory. I will then go to the service, to the login service of Microsoft, to post those 3 secrets in there. And what I get back is a bearer token, an authentication token, actually. Yes. So it will return this. And in the end, I will just combine the token type and the access token from this particular JSON. And those 2 things together, they are a authentication token. Right. Then in the end, I will need to enter this DAX query. You see, I have this DAX query in here. And there's this 501 I was telling you about. So I just left it here for this purpose, because you would want to change this into something more than 501, just to be able to get more than 501 records from the service. Yeah, so I can update to any number I like, and then I can post this DAX to this DAX query. And here at the top, you see my Power BI data set. And actually, how did I get this data set? Well, you can just go here to this data set, and here at the top, you will see the ID. You will see the ID that, you will see the ID that I was just meaning. Yeah, so that's what I used in my Automate flow here at the top. This is a beautiful number over here. And that's also the number that I used in my flow over here. There it is. Yeah. So you are posting the DAX query to the service. There will be something back. Beautiful JSON. And then you will need to get, and that's what I said was the pretty annoying part. You will need to get the first table, the first result from the first table, and then the rows from this one. Well, you need this because this is a very complex JSON file, and you really need only one thing. And then having fetched those records, you will need to insert them into SharePoint, and then it will look like this. So in the end, then you will have a SharePoint list filled with your data from your data set. And then I have built this Power App for them. And this Power App was just built on the SharePoint list. Yeah. So in the end, the solution looks like this. I have a Power Automate flow that is waiting for comma-separated files to be produced in the morning by their own system. So they have a OneDrive directory. Every morning, new comma-separated files with millions of records are posted there. I am waiting for the last file to be saved on this particular location. As soon as this last file arrives, I will be using Power Automate to refresh a dataset of PowerBI. I will even be waiting for this refresh to have finished, because you never know how long this lasts, because you can also poll the PowerBI service about the status of a PowerBI refresh. So I'm waiting in a loop for this refresh to be finished. And as soon as PowerBI has finished, I mean, all the calculations on the proper numbers to order have been processed in PowerBI then I'm exporting this result from PowerBI. Yeah. So that's the final. And then in the morning, they get an email saying, okay, everything is refreshed, and then they can start ordering. So they fire up the Power Automate, the Power App. They see their data. They pick out the suppliers that don't have a minimum order amount reached yet, and they are adding some extra numbers to it, to all those articles of this particular supplier. And then in the end, they can just press a button in Power Apps to say, okay, I just want to place this order at this moment. Yeah. So that's the complete setup, actually, of my Power Automate flow. I will just kill my telephone again. Right. Okay. I have one more sheet, two more sheets to show you. And because it's not only this that can be done by Power Automate, I also got a question from somebody else. And somebody else said, hey, we are using, one moment. Somebody said we are using embedded capacity. And we have learned that this costs us a lot of money if we don't use it. I mean, if it's active, but we don't use it, for instance, overnight, it should be turned off actually. So what did I find out for them? The embedded capacity of Power BI in the web service also has a web API. And through this web API, you can just suspend or you can resume this capacity. So in the morning at 7 o'clock, it is started. In the evening at 7 o'clock, it is suspended, and they save 12 hours of paying this, because this is billed per hour. Yeah, so this Power Automate flow was paid back within a few minutes, so to speak. Yeah, because it's quite a costly thing, this embedded capacity. Yeah, so that was another thing that you could do this way. And then there's this other thing I'd like to show you. You can find out if a Power BI service has been refreshed, yes or no. Yeah, so I found out this trick. You can get the history of refreshes of Power BI, and through an OData query, you can just get the top one, which means you can just get the last one. So you get the last one from your refreshes. And I could just then find out, is there the word finished in there, yes or no? And if it's not finished yet, just wait a few minutes and then try again. So that way, this web API also works very good. It just helps me to pause the Power Automate flow, to wait for the Power BI to be refreshed, and as soon as it's refreshed, just continue with the rest of the flow. Yeah, so that's quite a complex Power Automate thing, but I hope I have shown you what the possibilities of this are. I don't know if anybody of you has questions. Just if you don't want to have questions, you can always reach me on the email or whatever. But I think I've shown you a lot of things about how Power Automate and Power BI might work together. I will show the sheets with you. Within my sheets, I also have some interesting hyperlinks about some details that you find about this DAX REST API and how to set up a service principal and Active Directory, etc., etc. So I think this was my presentation for you. I hope you really thought it might be interesting for you to experiment with. I would certainly suggest you do this. I still want to ask you, is there somebody who wants to put a question to me? Is there something you'd like to know at the end, or would you want to do it by email? That is also an option if you want to.
Is there anyone who wants to ask a question?